Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. If you're paying attention, you know that you only make money when you work. It might be great money, but it's dependent on you. The information on this podcast will help you solve that. We interview experts and provide analysis into financial freedom through commercial real estate. Why? To help physicians like you thrive. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. This is your host, Dr. Michael McManus, and we are here with Dr. Joe Pizzona. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate you having me on today.
All right, so we'll jump into your bio. So Joe creates jobs for burnt out healthcare professionals. He also helps frustrated healthcare administrators find much needed medical services in rural communities. Physicians and other healthcare professionals are leaving medicine because they feel taken advantage of by a broken system. Simultaneously, rural healthcare executives are struggling to recruit high-quality physicians to their communities. Declining supply and increasing demand, this isn't sustainable. The solution: prioritizing the healthcare team, leveraging technological solutions, i.e. telemedicine, and engaging in collaborative conversations with physicians and administrators. Joe is a physician, entrepreneur, CEO with over 15 years of experience caring for patients in rural, mid-sized, and metropolitan areas. He understands the challenges and nuances facing the healthcare model and team to solve the issues. Prior to the pandemic, he formed a Virtue Care, a company that partners with rural healthcare systems to implement outpatient urology clinics and surgical services. They've successfully launched 6 different sites across 4 healthcare systems. Virtue Care has created a new physician position of teleurologist and offers consistent remote work for urologists with a dynamic team. In August 2020, he opened Pizzona MD Urology in downtown Nashville during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic with no previous business training. Within 3 years, his team has opened 2 additional offices and recruited 6 advanced practice providers with an additional urologist, all while receiving over 1,000 5-star Google reviews. Their mission is to scale into other specialties throughout Tennessee and into additional markets as they deliver accessible healthcare with a smile. So as you can tell from that intro, we're venturing a little bit outside of real estate today, but the point here is I've been following Joe for a little while on LinkedIn, and I just really like what he was doing. And I thought, this is a great thing because a lot of people investing in commercial real estate and docs investing in it are to become more work optional or gain more control over their schedule and not really feel trapped in the system. And Joe's doing the same thing from a different perspective. So Joe, welcome to the show. This is awesome.
Mike, thank you. I really appreciate the kind introduction. And yeah, it's kind of neat to hear someone read your bio back to you and go, well, I guess I have done something, because I'm constantly filled with self-doubt and imposter syndrome, which as a physician is a tough transition into the world of business, because we don't learn this in medical school. And even despite everything you just read, I still have doubts to this day of like, do I know what I'm doing?
And it's true. And the other great thing is that we're taught during our training to not be self-promoters. We're supposed to just show up and work hard. And so self-promotion, I've even heard people be like, oh, you run ads, you're a bad doctor type of comments. And so it's a really big hurdle for a lot of docs to get over to do any real self-promotion. How hard was that for you in the beginning? I mean, so wait, before I go there, I'm gonna rewind a little bit. So tell us a little bit more about, your story. Was it kind of a traditional straight into doctorhood story, or any previous entrepreneurial experience before becoming a doctor?
Yeah, I'll quickly answer your question just to keep people and we'll circle back to it. But it was not hard because I like bucking things, and I don't believe in systems that don't make sense to me. And so I don't look at it as self-promotion. I look at if you create a value for someone, if you provide a solution, I really feel you have a moral obligation to promote what you do. So not only is it comfortable, I feel like it is an obligation to do it. And why shouldn't it be? We have this old school mentality that healthcare is, this sacred thing that you can't promote. Hold on, there are people all over this country suffering, and they don't know where to go for help or solutions. So if you have a great solution, you have to let them know about it, because people can't find you if they're not aware of you or they don't trust you. So that's my quick answer to that. Um, but diving into kind of my background history, no, like I said, I jokingly said earlier, man, that I don't know what the hell I'm doing, and I still don't. I don't come from a family of doctors or entrepreneurs. I was raised in downstate New York, very sort of blue and lower white collar family members, Italian, Polish immigrants from the turn of the century. Kind of came here with a hope and a dream. My great grandfather was a coffin maker back in the day from Italy. And, I was a good student, and I really just stumbled into medicine. I was, like I think a lot of us, good at math and science. I'm not a research type. I liked being around people. And so I volunteered at a hospital one day, and I said, all right, this seems cool. I applied to a 7-year medical program at Northwestern, and I guess I hit their quota for, guys out of state who, seemingly knew what they were doing, I guess, or had good grades, and got in. I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to be a doctor. And so I went into healthcare very naive. Once I got to medical school, I realized I was in the right place. I loved it. I loved every moment of it. But then when it came to becoming a physician, I had no idea what a urologist was, because again, I didn't have guidance. And so I, again, stumbled upon urology and haven't looked back. But I think, approached medicine probably like a lot of us do with I don't want to worry about that business stuff, right? Like, I just want to take care of patients. I just did a challenging residency. I want to go do some, nephrectomies and prostatectomies and do these big whacks and, kind of what every young surgeon wants to do, right? And not worry about all that other stuff. And then you get out in the real world and you realize that a lot of what you learned in residency, you don't do that often. And there are so many processes and systems that are in place or not in place that directly impact your ability to deliver a high quality patient experience and care, and also very selfishly affect your schedule. I mean, any surgeon has dealt with slow turnover times, right? And dealt with inefficient systems of, God, how come I can't get through this clinic quicker? I'm exhausted. I was up all night doing cases. I want to get home to my family. And so I really came into it with this naivete early in my career.
Hang on just a second. I'm switching internet connections because my connection is unstable. Okay, there it goes. All right. Sorry about that. Um, so that naivete, it's funny how a lot of us, probably most of us, came into it with that, not understanding how much that was going to impact our daily life. And until we engage in it, you're kind of a slave to the system. When I talk to older urologists who usually worked in a 1, 2, or 3 doc practice, they worked at a hospital that they weren't employed by or dedicated to. And there was a lot more where the hospital came to them and was like, how are we serving you? How can we help you better? And they really cared about those things. You were kind of shepherded into thinking about those things, but that's gone away now. Did you ever have the hospital come to you after you finished residency and seek your input on how they were serving you?
I didn't, but I really can't sit here and complain about my first job. I joined a physician-led multi-specialty clinic out in rural Washington State, and we really had a strong group of urologists. There were 5 of us, very well trained, had been in the community for a number of years, And at least when I first got there, the hospital really took care of us. And it was because the CEO was a doctor.
Okay.
And it was really this sort of perfect little microclimate. I finished residency, I think, when you did back in '08. And it really was a good group. And so it was a good place to be. And, I could walk 5 minutes down the hallway and I'm in the OR. And when I was done, I could walk right back to my clinic and I wasn't running all over some big city covering multiple places. But then, what I think happened in our town and what happens in a lot of places is, there's changes, there's challenges, and we ultimately ended up merging with a community hospital, became a bigger entity. And we had a change in leadership and gathered these multiple layers of middle managers. And now all of a sudden, what made that place magical kind of unfortunately the veneer started becoming a little less shiny. And that's when I started to kind of see that and the frustrations. And then also, I think probably what I faced, which I think a lot of surgeons have faced at various times, is, this mentality of don't buck the system. Hey, why do you want to do this robotic surgery stuff? I do a great radical retropubic prostatectomy. This is an amazing surgery. Who would ever do robotics?
I did that.
Yeah. And listen, I used to love the case. I mean, I did quite a number in residency. Bill Catalona trained us at Northwestern, and I went through my fair share of those with him. But there's this mentality. We talk about a fixed mindset, and I think if I had to pick some themes to talk about, that's one of them that just drives me insane. And that's why I don't look at marketing as an evil thing. I look at it as an obligation. That's why I've embraced minimally invasive technologies when they're good for the patient, and that's where things are headed. And that's when I've also looked at new processes. And so I think in the beginning part of my career, once I got that confidence of, okay, I think I know what I'm doing, I can take care of patients. Now I want to focus on all the processes because that's now my constraint. It's no longer my confidence or experience. And you keep getting told no, or you keep getting told, well, we've always done things this way. And after a while, you either fall in line or you don't. And I'm not really good at falling in line. I'm actually a really terrible employee. But I like to think I do it all for the sake of efficiency and patient care in a better way. It's not to say I don't make mistakes, but it's healthcare. I mean, half of what we learned in medical school is wrong within 10 years. So if we're not evolving with our processes, this is a very complex system. How is it that we still use eFaxes? What other industry uses scanned PDF files to send records? It is absurd. It's like, I was part of a medical practice, Mike, where I was told I couldn't have more clinic days because my medical assistant needed more time to fax records. Let that sink in for a second. They thought the best business for that practice was for a physician to not see patients another day, but rather to just sit around and go bug doctors for referrals because the MA needed time to fax records. And then if I wanted to see more patients in a day, I should just do more, quote, throughput, which is the nice way of saying be unethical and see 100 patients in a day like some people do. So, it's just that, again, that fixed mindset that I think has never sat well with me. And I think that's probably what led me into a path of entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship by definition is creating solutions for problems. That's what an entrepreneur is. And I think if you're a surgeon, you are to a degree an entrepreneur, or I hope you are, because that's what we need in healthcare.
It's funny because as I started on more of an entrepreneurial journey or even in real estate, and people, when we discussed things that were the same and things that were different, and people wanted to believe that the biggest correlation to being a surgeon was that you dug into numbers and you planned really thoroughly. And what most people outside of surgery were shocked to find out is that I felt the biggest correlation was actually what happens when you get into surgery, because there's the way it's drawn up in the in your mind, the way it's drawn up in the textbook, but nobody's anatomy is the same. It's like when you have that one case a year that you come out of and go, wow, that anatomy was just like Netter's. It it worked just like it's drawn up in the textbook. And that's once a year that happens. And usually you go in with a plan and you know that pretty much most of it or a lot of it is going to be a little bit different. And it's nice when it's a little bit and not a lot different. And part of why the more experience you have, because now you've seen all these variations, so they're less uh, overwhelming or less distracting or slow you down less every time you see it. But it's a big part of what we do as surgeons when we look at it from a business standpoint and say, I don't know, or that's not going to work. How do we know that's going to work? And it seems more daunting, even though the risk of something going wrong is much, or the consequences of something going wrong is much lower if you make a bad business decision, you go, that didn't work, than if you make a bad surgical decision. We should feel liberated by the chance to try things with impunity. And the worst thing that happens is you spend a little money to set something up and it was a disaster. So it's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, no, I mean, Mike, what a beautiful analogy you just made. That you're so right. In surgery, it's constantly pivoting, right? It's like, oh, you ran out of that catheter I really like today. All right, well, how can I MacGyver a solution together, right? Or, oh, wow, I did not go in expecting to see all this scar tissue, or, now I've got to change my plan. And we do it without thinking because of our 10,000 hours of time we've put in, right, to become an expert in that field. Whereas, like you said, in business, and I think that, or the business of healthcare, one of the cardinal errors that I think physicians make is that they underestimate the risk of staying the status quo and overestimate the risk of doing something different. So in other words, you look at the typical conversation you'd have with an employed physician. Well, this is safe. I'm a W-2 employee. I've got my salary. I can't go start my own practice, or I can't go do that. Like, I've got the golden handcuffs, as they say, right? And my answer to them is, listen, do you think that shitty job's going anywhere? Seriously, go right now on Practice Link. There are 1,000 job openings for urology, and that's only in the places that are really desperate. You could go to any practice, call them up, and be like, hey, I'm living in your city. You got a job? And I guarantee almost every single practice will be like, yes, we would love to have you. So, it's, again, this sort of risk aversion. I think we're beaten into it because, again, back to the surgery analogy, it's not acceptable to have a complication. Now, we know if you operate enough, you are going to have complications, but the bar is set at a 0, right? That we go for 0, knowing it's going to be hopefully only in the single digits. And if you're double digits, you're probably doing something wrong, or you got some pretty sick patients. Whereas in business, you want to fail as quickly as possible so you can learn more and iterate and tweak and do it better the next time. And that has been just a complete mindset shift that has been a challenge to kind of overcome. And I got to even catch myself at times going, okay, no, this is okay. Like, you get out of your surgeon brain. No one died. You didn't end up cutting the ureter or something bad. Like, this is okay. Like, this is the world of business. And we can all look back upon the epic failures of business icons. I mean, from Steve Jobs to Bezos to Elon Musk. I mean, the very best entrepreneurs the world has ever seen. Thomas Edison. What they all have in common is they failed, but they picked themselves up, they kept going, and they believed in what they were doing. And they had that, I think, curiosity to ask lots of good questions, to surround themselves with good people. And I think surgeons, we tend to have a little bit more of an isolationist mindset, right? It's just me against the world. Only I can do this. I'm in the trenches. I'm the only one who's done this. I'm the board certified urologist. This is me, because no one's got my back. And it's definitely a mindset shift.
Don't you think we're kind of trained? I mean, what was the saying, and during general surgery was, do it yourself, check it twice, trust no one.
Yeah.
That, you're led down that road, and then one day you realize, like, wow, why am I doing everything myself and I don't trust anybody? You're like, oh, because I spent a decade learning that that's the way it's supposed to be. So you came out of high school, went straight into a 7-year med school or undergrad med school program.
Mhm.
and then stayed and did your residency also at Northwestern, um, which maybe we'll have another podcast. I interestingly was just at a meeting and met a doc who's a Northwest grad who during the pandemic created some software program to do a bunch of the work there was no doctors for, and then turned it into a big multi-million-dollar company. And now Northwestern is looking at him to build something to take all the Northwestern med school grads and start publicizing them about, look how great we are. So I
Mhm.
found another Northwest. I'm not a my sister went to Northwest Law School, but um, so that's sorry, the sidetrack there. So you went all the way through at Northwestern and then went to Washington State. So really no business experience before that. How much? Go ahead.
No, no, correct. Yeah, really no business at that point.
So how much of an impact do you think that that first job, where you were talking about a lot of docs, they're employed now and they come in and they're like, don't shake the tree. It's scary. I don't want to upset anybody. And you don't want to change anything. But that your first job was in a truly physician run, efficient, because the scales of efficiency, my first job was in a surgeon owned surgical hospital. And once you leave and you see, like, you thought that, you know, the academic place was less efficient, you just assumed it was an academic place, and then you go out and you work someplace and you're like, oh, this is what private practice is like. And then you get into a system and you're like, wait, you realize that first experience was the abnormal thing. How much did that impact your view of the world as you started interacting with the rest of the healthcare system?
Yeah, it's a good question. I really think of my first job, I really, again, didn't have any sort of entrepreneurial spark still at this time. I mean, I saw that there were systems and processes that could be better. I really can't say I had an issue, say, with OR efficiency, but it was really more a matter of just seeing a decline. I think from where I started in '08, when it was truly physician led, to when I left about 8 years later, there was a lack of innovation during those 8 years. There was a decline in the culture and the way that things were going, seemingly, again, more middle managers, more bureaucracy. And so really on a lark, I said, let me see what else is out there. There were a series of events that had occurred, nothing that was like earth shattering or worth sharing, all, relatively minor stuff in isolation, but was enough to go, I don't know if this is my place for the rest of my career. Like, I was just complacent. And again, that's just not me. And so I looked, and there was a job to be a chief of urology and a head of robotic surgery down in the Southeast. And it said, build your own urology department in your vision. I said, well, that sounds awesome. Be head of robotic surgery. I was like, well, that's what I've been trying to do here, And so ultimately, tried to do as much research as I could, but nonetheless, I think, again, my naivete of, well, the grass is going to be greener over here, right? Like, I just got to go somewhere else, and I'll be able to solve some of these problems because they're telling me I have permission to do so, right? And unfortunately, I got down there, and I was chief in a title, but had no decision-making authority. I couldn't hold people accountable. And if you can't make decisions, you can't hold people accountable. I don't care what your title is, you ain't a leader. You're an employee. So those were hooks to get me down there to be an employee. And so, ultimately, and I'll get to how we get to my entrepreneurship, and unfortunately involves a low point, was it just kept going downhill and downhill. We went from 3 urologists with a guy taking 24/7 call to, within a year, there's only 2 of us left. We were on call Q2 with some weekend help. We didn't have a practice manager. We didn't have competent people answering our phones. Seemingly our voice was just not being heard. And so we called for a meeting with the hospital leadership and the chairman of the department and said, guys, you've lost 5 urologists in the past few years. Okay. And there's only 2 of us left. And so this isn't an us problem. This is a systems problem. And these are the things that have to be changed if we're going to continue to do this. Because, I'm 40 years old here at this point, and I've got, young kids. It can't be Q2 call, especially when I took a job where it was zero call. And I'll never forget the CEO of the system looked at me in the eye and says, "Joe, we're going to fix this." And he said, "We're going to fix that. We're going to fix it. We're going to fix it." And a few months later, I got called in for my annual review with the chairman, and they said, "Joe, you're a great urologist. You take great care of patients, but we're letting you go today. You just don't fit in." And they handed me my contract showing the 6-month out clause without cause. And they said, "You're going to work here for the next 6 months if you so choose. If you say anything bad about us, we'll fire you immediately on the spot. Good luck." And so it was in that moment, Mike, where I really felt like I'd been betrayed by the system. Now, by no means was I easy to work with, and by no means was I not culpable to a degree. But again, I wasn't asking for $1 million salary and catered meals to my home. I was asking for a practice manager. I was asking that when I did a complex partial nephrectomy in a patient, that they didn't have to feel they had to drive 90 miles north to the academic hospital because no one would answer our phones, and I'd never get a message about that patient who was having terrible abdominal pain. And so it really opened my eyes to a number of things. Number one, that a lot of times physicians, especially surgeons, if we're in smaller or very markets that are dominated by just one or two entities, you're really beholden to those entities. And you either play ball the way they do it, or you don't work out. And as a dad of 3 kids, I was not in a position where I can just willy-nilly move my family and everyone's in agreement. And so, ultimately, Mike, and this is, I think, getting to the root of your question, I just got to a point where, again, I hit my rock bottom. I mean, I was literally for weeks on the carpet every day at the end of home, just in tears, not knowing what to do. I mean, I literally did not have a job in this town. I had unfortunately gone through a divorce, and was not having much luck with in that front of getting agreement for where we were going to live potentially as a family. And so I had to say, all right, well, not feeling sorry for myself. I need to find a solution. I've got a bad cancer, and I got to figure a way to cut this damn thing off. And so it's when I pivoted and went to Nashville. That's when I pivoted and started thinking in an entrepreneurial mindset, because I literally hadn't had the job that I felt like that felt like the right place for me. I felt like I tried the system and the traditional employee jobs, and it just wasn't working. And I had to find a place of stability for me and my children. And I think that's really what led to my path of entrepreneurship. So it wasn't an inefficient OR or a change to a system and gosh darn it, this just didn't work. I mean, I was fired. Talk about a humbling experience. And I speak openly about it because I don't think enough people do. And honestly, in that moment, it was the worst moment of my life, or one of the worst, but it was a blessing. And it turned out it was one of the best things that could have ever happened to me, because it forced me into entrepreneurship. It forced me to be really curious and resourceful, and to go and create a solution for me, because I don't have a safety net. I don't come for much. I've paid for every dime of school I've gone to. I don't have a big nest egg that's sitting there. 3 kids and an ex-wife are expensive, and the bills got to get paid every month. So I didn't have a choice. But again, it was a gift that I went through that, even though it was quite painful. And I hope I can help other surgeons land more softly than I did, and hopefully not go through as much pain and that I went through. But I also want to be here today doing some great things if I didn't go through it.
That's amazing. You answered my next question about how you felt about that, versus if they had kept you on and you had just persevered and anguished in a not great environment, you might still be there. And are you
Well, I think,
where you're at
yeah.
now seems like you're much happier.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think sadly, again, I think my situation truly was a blessing. I don't mean that in any tongue-in-cheek way. I am very grateful that happened because I was forced to do that. I don't know if I would have had the courage to do it on my own if I wasn't forced out. Um, and so I'm very empathetic to, my story. Yeah, I know there's some people out there who might have something similar, but probably 100x are the people who don't have that story, but are still just as burnt out. And they're in
Yeah,
there and
I
they're
was
and they're, and they're scared.
I that's exactly. I was just at a meeting, well, called Passive Investor MD Con, and they also had an entrepreneurship. And I'm just going to give Peter Kim a little press time here. We did a whole show on it, but anyway, um, and the number of because I was never actually employed by a healthcare system, was closely associated with some, had some income guarantees, and so it wasn't like I was free on my own. But I like it was in my favor and was never in a place where I could be fired. And some probably would have if they could. But the number of docs I talked to at this meeting who spoke of fear of getting fired, and one who got an ER doc who got fired after a nurse complained and that the CNO had more power than the CMO, and they locked horns and she got fired. And it was a little bit eye-opening because I'd never really felt like I was at risk um, of being fired. And I'm glad I made some of the decisions I did, that I was never there. But it's a real thing for docs now to worry about getting fired, and kind of like where you were at. And then what do I do now? And I would just like to say to everybody, that there are very few specialties that supply and demand is not on your side. And that if you're in a situation that's ripping your guts out, there's likely a better situation out there somewhere. But it's really, really scary to jump ship and leave that bad situation sometimes if the other side is not is not well known. So I can, and so that, I guess, is talking to anybody out there who's really suffering in their job, but they're really afraid to change, is dig into it, because the other side is often better. And I have a mentor, he always says, the people who are happiest are the ones who had a really bad, well-paying job and then found a way to leave it. And
Yeah,
so, or you realize that I don't have to be stuck here just because of the money. So
Mike, it's so true, and kudos to you for getting that message out to people. And I just want to, further accentuate that idea. What's scarier is looking back to me on a life where you put yourself through misery, you put your family through misery. I mean, our families can feel it. Our loved ones can feel it when we're not our true authentic self, and we're not being fulfilled. And listen, don't get me wrong, entrepreneurship, running your practice, starting a company, it's difficult, but it's actually simple. The concepts they're not complex. I mean, it's actually pretty simple business ideas like cardiopulmonary physiology and electrophysiology. Like that shit's hard. That's really complex. I still don't understand what my EP friends do. And we're plumbers, right? I mean, urology is pretty straightforward. You either got a leakage problem or a blockage problem, but business is similarly simple. And so this idea like, oh my God, so scary. What, you can do it. You can absolutely, listen, if you got through residency and you've been in practice for a couple of years, you can 100% do it. Now, there are ways to do it wrong, and there are ways to mitigate risk so it's has a higher likelihood of success. And but I think that's part of what I'm trying to do with coming on shows like yours, and what I'm trying to build on LinkedIn is just this voice that it's okay to be scared, but it's not okay to sit in misery for years upon years, and that you do have a choice. There is always a way out of it. And so we've got to stop suffering in silence. We have to stop this unreasonable stoicism that I think a lot of us have. I'm resilient. You can't get through residency if you're not resilient. But it doesn't mean that that's how your life should be. Yes, it's a calling. Yes, we're dealing with people's lives and their health. It doesn't mean you can't promote yourself and run a business and that you've got to sit and be miserable and be some widget in a system. I mean, it's a broken healthcare system. It's not working for patients. It's not working for doctors. And so again, we go back to what's entrepreneurship. It's solutions for problems. And that's really, you know, I look at what we've been able to do with our team in 4 years. And the number one reason that we've been able to do what we've done is because I now have the bandwidth and the energy to do it. It's because I'm out of that system. When you're in it, you're like, I mean, it's almost like an abusive relationship, sadly. I mean, there's this learned helplessness. And so it is so freeing. And again, even this week you're interviewing me. I've got some very big business decisions I've got to make. I've been, waking up early and, working weekends. And that's not taking an ER call or going to some, credentialing meeting. It's worrying about who's staying on our team and, do we have to pivot our business model? I mean, constantly thinking about it, but it's on my terms and it's towards building something. And so I don't look at it as work anymore. Whereas before, there were moments I didn't want to go in. I mean, I felt like I wasn't even myself. And so I know a lot of people feel like that, but I know you're afraid, but you can do it.
There's such a correlation between, I think all doctor things, being a doctor, being an entrepreneur, it's all stressful. But when the correlation between how much power do you have over the responsibility that you have. And to me, I think that's the biggest thing for doctors right now in employed models. They have all the responsibility they've always had, but they have no control. They have no power over any of it. And that's crushing. But when you, as you're saying now, you're working weekends and trying to figure out how to make these business decisions, but you have power over the things that are also stressful. And it's not as stressful. It almost becomes like the stress before you run a race or some little, and on the other side, you're like, yeah, that was cool. And even when it fails, you're like, okay, well, now I know it doesn't work. Let's do something different. And it's a totally different life coming at it from that perspective.
It is. I love the race analogy, right? Again, it's challenging, but it's on my terms. And any issues I have in business, I created. I mean, I warn everyone who goes and takes this path, like, here's the good news about kind of starting your own practice and being an entrepreneur. The good news is you get to make every decision. The bad news is you have to make every decision and then look at yourself in the mirror, because if you're going to bitch, you've only got one person to blame. And every painful moment of my journey these past 4 years is because of choices I made. Now, again, I don't beat myself up over it. I've got to learn from it and move on. And again, that's really hard as a surgeon, especially. I have that now autonomy to craft what the future looks like. And there's going to be challenges. There's going to be bumps in the road. It's not all smooth. But at least I have that autonomy. And I'm glad that I'm driving the bus and I'm not sitting in the back seat with a bunch of, middle managers driving the bus who I'm like, ooh, I don't think these people know what they're doing, which is, I think, is what a lot of us surgeons feel in these employed positions.
Well, that's a great analogy because, like all docs are used to. I didn't set my do not disturb on my phone. That's a bad podcaster. All of us are used to making decisions with consequences. And that if you make a bad decision medically, that then you learn from it and you change. So doctors already know how to do this, but it's like, because we learned it all the way through residency, that's okay, but it's scarier to do a business thing. And business mistakes don't hurt near as much as patient mistakes. There's still a lot of responsibility, but I just like docs to know, like, you already have all this. You're just pivoting it into a little different realm. You're learning something new. You do it all the time just to keep up with healthcare. So I love your perspective there.
Thanks, Mike.
That's all right. So we're going to wrap up this first half of our conversation here with Joe. And then for the second half, we're going to come back and we're going to talk a lot more about his companies and what he's doing, because I think it's absolutely amazing. So thank you for being here. Thank you for everybody for listening, and join us for the next episode here on Surgeon Syndicate.
Do you care about paying too much in taxes? And would you like to save more of your hard-earned dollars? Here's what we found. We found that most financial professionals have a one-size-fits-all solution. So the question is, would it make it easier for you to have someone tailor your tax solutions to your individual needs so you can keep more of your money and do what you want with it? That is exactly what we do at Excelstra.
As surgeons, we know the difference between routine surgery versus life-threatening interventions. And I want you to know that I've used Unicia and her team for my personal financial intervention, and I love the results. I would do you a disservice if I didn't recommend them to you.
We'd love to help you, so let's jump on a call and see how we can collaborate. Simply go to www.excelstra.com/McManus and book your free call today.
This has been an episode of Surgeon Syndicate. If you got value from this episode, you know other surgeons are hungry to become job optional, and you can help them by sharing this content today. Schedule a call and we can make a plan. Looking forward to having you with me on the next episode.